Good afternoon. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Montreal, Canada on August 2nd, 2024. This week, Israel and the United States have engaged in major escalations of their wars across West Asia. First, an Israeli airstrike in Beirut killed Hezbollah's top military commander, Fouad Shukur. That strike also reportedly killed 3 women and 2 children. Israel has admitted that it killed Shukur. Then on that same day, a U.S. airstrike on Iraq's Popular Mobilization Forces killed 4 of its members. Iraq's military quickly accused the U.S. of committing a, quote, heinous crime, close quote, by targeting Iraq's own security forces. The U.S. admitted to that strike, claiming that it was acting in self-defense. Then what is perhaps the mother of provocations. A blast killed Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of the political wing of Hamas, in Tehran, the capital of Iran. And Haniyeh was in Iran to attend the inauguration of its new president, Masoud Pezeshkian. These 3 attacks followed an apparent Israeli airstrike on Yemen on July 20th. So far, no one has claimed responsibility for the strike in Tehran this week. However, the Times of Israel reported that Israel's government press office, which operates under the auspices of Netanyahu's office, briefly posted an image of Haniyeh with the word eliminated stamped across his forehead. The post, according to the Times of Israel, was later deleted. Now, here to join me and to discuss these consequential events is Trita Parsi. Trita is the co-founder and executive vice president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, as well as the founder and former president of the National Iranian American Council. Trita, I've been looking forward very much to having this conversation with you, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule.
Good to be with you.
So, Trita, I'd like to begin our conversation, which is going to focus on the U.S. government's intentions vis-a-vis a broader war with Iran by playing for you and our audience a clip from a presentation made at an emergency session of the UN Security Council this week by Robert Wood, the U.S. representative. I'm not going to play the entire speech, but I think this clip will give us a very good flavor of what Mr. Wood had to say on behalf of the United States government.
Iran must abide by the Council's resolutions. In failing that, the Security Council must consider additional measures to enforce its resolutions to hold Iran accountable and address repeated actions by its terrorist proxies and partners that threaten regional peace and security. Third, the United States was not aware of or involved in the apparent death of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh. Indeed, we have no independent confirmation as to Hamas's claims regarding his death. Fourth, and as Secretary Blinken noted earlier today, it is best not to speculate on the impact that recent events may have on peace and security in the Middle East. A broader war is neither imminent nor inevitable, although the opportunistic attacks by Iran and its network of terrorist proxies and partners across the region have repeatedly brought us closer to a regional conflict. For our part, the United States will continue to lead the way in diplomatic efforts to end the war in Gaza and reduce regional tensions. We will continue to work hard to prevent a broader regional war. That starts, as Secretary Blinken reaffirmed today, with finalizing an agreement for an immediate ceasefire with the release of hostages in Gaza, as called for in Resolution 2735.
Now, Trita, let me start. I'm going to break this down a bit. And by the way, that I think really is representative of the entire speech. But in the description to this video, I'm going to provide a clip to the entire UN Security Council, or a link, I should say, to the entire UN Security Council debate, so that those who want to hear the entirety of Robert Wood's speech and the other speeches, and I commend them to you at this particularly dangerous moment, you can do so by just clicking on the link I'm going to provide. But I would like to start by focusing on something that Robert Wood said in that particular excerpt, and that is that, quote, the U.S. was not aware of or involved in the apparent death of Ismail Haniyeh, closed quote. So, Trita, I must tell you that I have tremendous skepticism about this statement. This was obviously a matter of potentially immense importance to the security, not only of Israel, but also the United States. I think no matter what the intentions of the U.S. government may be, and the Israeli government may be, they appreciate that the strike on the killing of Hania in Tehran had the potential to ignite a much broader war. And I have great difficulty believing that Israel would do something that is of that potential significance to U.S. national security without even consulting the United States, given its dependence upon U.S. support. What is your take on this?
You raise very important points, and I definitely can understand why one would lead to the conclusions that you have, and I don't necessarily dispute them. I do, however, believe that there are also alternative explanations. First of all, you pointed out that the Israeli government is very dependent on the United States, and in one way that is absolutely true. But the word dependent makes it sound as if the U.S. is calling the shots. The U.S. has tremendous amount of leverage, and it is not using that leverage. And as a result, the Israelis are doing quite a lot of things that they don't run by the U.S. government, that is clearly against the U.S.'s interests, and the U.S. government doesn't seem to have the backbone to stand up against that. This is particularly true in the manner in which the Netanyahu government tends to treat democratic governments. And in the case of Biden, we've never seen any president as deferential to Netanyahu as Biden has been, particularly in the last 10 months. Let me add a couple of other points in support of the conclusion that the U.S. government must have known. I mean, when you see the coordination that is taking place here, that the U.S. government started bombing some of these militias in Iraq, moves to ships to the Mediterranean. A day and a half before the assassination, Bill Burns is meeting with the head of the Mossad in ceasefire negotiations. It's very difficult to conclude, and certainly a lot of people in the region conclude, that this is evidence that the United States was in on it. It presumes, however, that things between the United States and Israel are actually quite fine and dandy and trustworthy, and the Israelis have enough politeness to tell the United States beforehand what it does. I think there's also a different read of this, and that is not that the Israelis or the Netanyahu government in particular was coordinating, and that under normal circumstances it wouldn't have coordinated. I think under normal circumstances, if it wanted to do something like this, it would probably have to do it without telling the US, because it knows that the US most likely would have objected. Your own question presumes that as well, mindful of the fact that you said that this would be quite dangerous for the US. I think what you saw is that Netanyahu, and also incidentally, Netanyahu just came back from Washington. But when Netanyahu was in Washington, guess what he saw? He saw a country in disarray. He saw a Washington in disarray, and he saw a White House in disarray. You have the situation in which, a very unusual situation in which the president is getting off of the ticket and allowing the vice president to take that over. And that was done, I'm sure people understood that was not a clean fight. We saw how much Biden resisted it, how much it began with polite questions and then harsher op-eds, then leaks to the media that they're telling him that he has to do this. This is not convincing him. This is pushing him out. And then, of course, the Cy Hirsch story that says that they even were threatening to invoke Article 25 of the amendment, which essentially declares the president incapacitated. I think Netanyahu saw that. I think he also saw that the Harris administration would be tougher on him. The bar is, of course, low compared to the Biden administration, but saw that the type of the leeway that he had gotten with the Biden administration was probably going to be over if she becomes president, and then decided to take advantage of this disarray and escalate matters as much as possible now, force the United States once again into this fecal and indignified position of a bear hug of Israel, in which it's just bending over backwards to do whatever the Israelis want. And by creating as much of a crisis as possible before the elections, deprive a potential Harris presidency of the maneuverability to take her own initiatives. Instead, she would be forced to react to the crisis and whatever other problems Netanyahu has created. Sitting in Washington and seeing up front a lot of the tensions that do exist between the US and Israel, Despite the Biden administration's extreme efforts, and the speech by Ambassador Woods is part of that, extreme efforts to give an image externally as if they're completely on the same page. Reality is that there has been a lot of tensions, and those tensions are far greater now with Harris' team increasingly taking over things in the White House. So I'm not arguing for one or the other. I'm just saying that we don't have enough evidence at this point to be able to completely conclude what happened. But I do see an alternative explanation, which is that this is an opportunistic Netanyahu who realizes a rather unique level of disarray in the White House and is taking advantage of it.
Okay, so let me, I want to ask you a question.
Push back.
I'll play a little bit of devil's advocate, and that is,
Yeah, please do.
There certainly is a large degree of disarray there, but doesn't that also militate against the interpretation that the U.S. is trying to avoid a broader war, and that Netanyahu is exploiting the situation? Because if there's so much disarray and a broader war erupts, how much support can the Israeli government ultimately count upon? This is a government in the United States that is in chaos. We don't even know who's running this government. We don't know who the Democratic nominee is going to be even, although it seems very likely that that will be Kamala Harris. So wouldn't Netanyahu be looking at this situation and saying, I don't know if I can really count on these guys to have my back because there's total chaos in the White House. So I'm curious about your response to that.
I think it's a fascinating point. I think one has to understand, though, that sometimes chaos is actually exactly what you want in order to get your decision through, because you don't need to have a fully functioning decision-making process. You just need to make sure that within the chaos, if you can get your issue through, then the chaos actually can be helpful in the sense that it means that less attention is brought to your issue and you can just get it through by default, rather than necessarily having the very thorough debate and investigation of the issue before a decision is made. I do also think I would add another angle. The US's military plans to aid Israel in case of a multi-front war were developed quite a bit ago and are continuously updated. And that's on the military side. And the military is not in disarray. So then you'll end up in a chaotic situation. There is a military plan ready and actionable. It actually increases the likelihood that you will go with it. Because within the chaos, you may not have the ability of creating alternative ways forward. So I don't necessarily see the chaos being against it. I actually think that from Netanyahu's perspective, a chaos that it makes it easier for him to push the US into a knee-jerk pro-Israel position, complete deference, is quite preferable. And if he manages to create a war that brings the US into it, I mean, remember what he said when he came to Congress. The whole theme was to try to convince Americans that Netanyahu is actually not fighting for Israel. He's fighting for the United States. And if he manages to create this big crisis in which he drags the US into that war, that narrative, at least initially, will take hold, which is that US and Israel are in on this war together. It's going to take a while before people in the United States wake up and realize that they were conned, that they were lied to, that they were dragged into this against their interests. See the process when it happened in terms of Iraq. It took about 2.5 years before you really started seeing people opposing the war. It took several more years before people were really at a high level, forcefully arguing that they were being lied to. And then eventually you see that not only leading to Obama's election victory, but also Trump's election victory within the Republican primary, in which he specifically ran against the way the government had lied in case of Iraq. On Ukraine, you're also seeing it, despite the fact that no American body bags have come back. But it took no more than about 9 to 12 months in which people started to say, hold on, this is starting to look like a forever war. All of the plans are based on best case scenarios, and there's a lot of money going there. And no one is defining exactly what victory is looking like. They're saying, well, the Ukrainians have to decide, etc. So these things don't tend to work in the long run, but you definitely can make sure that it creates a scenario that is beneficial for you if you're Netanyahu in the short term.
So I take it from your comments, Trita, that do believe that Kamala Harris is going to be a more rational, moral, and law-abiding actor, how much remains to be seen, than Biden on the Israel file. And if
Well,
I've mischaracterized your perspective, please correct me, but I just want to,
no.
I
I can
just want to ask
understand.
my question first. And that is, have you seen, because again, I'm highly skeptical about a change in direction under Kamala Harris vis-a-vis Israel. Have you seen concrete indications that Kamala Harris is going to be more mindful of American interests, international law, the perception of the international community of this heinous genocide than Joe Biden has been? Concrete indications, and if so, what do you think those concrete indications are?
Your question is very valid. And let me first start off by saying I think skepticism is warranted. What I worry about sometimes, though, is that when skepticism becomes blinding and even small indicators and opportunities are missed because one is so I'm not saying that that's the position you're taking, but I do see it at times. People get so skeptical. It's actually the flip side of what I oftentimes see in Washington amongst the hawks. They're so blinded by a belief of how the other side will act. They will read everything the counterpart does in a negative way, and they actually miss opportunities for diplomacy or other openings because of that perspective. The similar thing can happen on the other side, is that they're so skeptical that there actually can be any change, and any opportunity to push for change as a result is wasted. But let's take a look at what she has done or said, and indicators in various directions. First of all, let's acknowledge that the bar is extremely low. All she needed to do and say is, hey, Palestinians are also humans. And suddenly she has shown a gazillion times more empathy with the Palestinians than Biden ever must have, because this has been an unusually cruel period, I have to say. Obviously for the Palestinians, but in terms of seeing a president that has just been so incapable or unwilling to express any empathy with the Palestinians. Notice, for instance, in that her first press conference, she mentioned that she spoke to someone, a friend, who had relatives died in Gaza. Biden has also spoken to some of those people. He's never talked about it. He's never gone in front of the cameras and said, I spoke to a Palestinian American who had family died in Gaza. Now, of course, this is all at the tone and rhetoric level. And tone and rhetoric does not amount to a policy change. If she ends up doing exactly the same thing as Biden is doing, but sprinkling a little bit of empathy and better rhetoric, it does not mean that there's actually any change worth celebrating in any way, shape, or form. However, any change of substance would have to be preceded by the type of rhetorical and tone change that we actually have seen her take. Her expression of empathy with the Palestinians. Note also something that I think actually goes into the substance area. The Biden administration rather disingenuously has been saying that it is the reason why there isn't a ceasefire is because Hamas has not signed on to it. Everyone knows that that's not the case because it's Netanyahu. What did she do when she was standing next to him after their meeting? She said, I told the prime minister, take the deal. Essentially means he is the one not taking the deal. So she shifted from putting the blame on Hamas to focusing on the prime minister. She could have said the same thing as Biden had said, which is, I told the prime minister, I really hope Hamas takes the deal. She didn't say that. That is beyond just rhetorical. That's, she's calling him out. Is it enough? No. But if there is going to be a change in substance, rest assured some of these things we just saw will have to precede that. That's why I don't want to be over skeptical. I'm seeing some signs there that could lead to something. More pressure is needed. There absolutely needs to be clarity, particularly from and I think there is clarity from the uncommitted movement, that they're not going to settle just for some rhetorical shifts. And then I'll make the last point also, which is I do know Phil Gordon, who is her national security advisor. And I would say that at least the conversation I had with him before he went into this administration, I spent more time with him when he was in the Obama administration, of course. He'd written books about it, understanding the limits of American power, understanding the need for far lesser ambition in American foreign policy in terms of thinking that they can transform regions and things of that nature, wrote books against regime change, wrote books about military intervention, or lengthy articles about that. I have a really hard time envisioning that the last 10 months in which he has been on the front row, he has seen that the politics of what Biden is doing is disastrous. He's seen the suffering of the Palestinians, and that for some reason he thinks that, oh, everything I wrote before about the limits of American power, etc., was wrong, and this is actually the right way to go. I think I'm much more comfortable concluding that he probably has been reinforced in that vision. Now, again, that may all not matter at all. We may actually have a Kamala Harris who wants to change. We may have a Kamala Harris with a national security advisor that has good plans on how to change. But Netanyahu manages now to create such crisis that the ability of them is not gone, but is severely hampered, because they're just going to be inheriting a major crisis. Already the US is once again in a position of just defending Israel, and their maneuverability and ability to actually take initiative is severely limited.
So I have one other, I know your time is limited, Trita. I have one other question, which isn't focused so much on the intentions of the United States. But before I do that, I must tell you on a personal level, although I expect the worst from this administration, including Kamala Harris, I do hope for the best. And much of this is informed by my own personal experience. In 2007, I was a busy partner in a class actions law firm in Canada, and I left for 2 weeks. I left my job and I went to the United States, and I worked on Barack Obama's bid for the Democratic nomination, because I was so inspired by the man. And I knew within 3 months of his election, or at least you may not feel this way, but I came to the conclusion he was a complete and utter fraud. So as his presidency, I mean, I think just about the only good thing he did in foreign policy was the nuclear deal with Iran. And his vice president, once he assumed the
Cuba.
White House. Yes, that's true. Well, a good point. But also once his vice president, his former vice president, took the White House, he did nothing to reinvigorate the nuclear deal with Iran.
Yeah.
In any event,
I would share your disappointment in what Obama has done in his post-presidency. On the Iran deal, that I think Biden really messed up. I think the Iranians share some blame as well. But the mess up of not going into the deal right away, as he could have, not lifting a finger to undo what Trump had done to kill Obama's opening to Cuba, which would have cost Biden nothing politically. It's shocking to me that Biden did these things. It's shocking to me that Obama didn't more to push him in the right direction.
So in the time remaining to us, I want to talk about other countries and what they're going to do. And I'm referring here to Russia and China. I don't think we talk nearly enough in the West about how this could not simply broaden to include Iran directly and all of its allies in the region, and potentially other states. Who knows? What will Turkey do? What will Egypt do? Will it continue to remain firmly in the camp of the United States? There are a lot of wild cards here once the bombs start dropping. But we don't talk enough about Russia and China, I think, about in this context. Both Russia and China have said repeatedly that their partnership with Iran is strategic. And there are reasons to believe that both Russia and Iran are involved extensively in exchange of weaponry and military technologies and intelligence. And China is the biggest buyer of Iranian oil. It's hard to believe that if the bombs start falling on Iran, that Russia and China are going to sit back and maintain a purely rhetorical posture towards this war. One would think, because their key strategic interests are at stake, they're going to become embroiled in some manner militarily. Do you agree with that? And if so, what do you think that military involvement might look like?
I think we have to separate the two. I think the Chinese play a very long game and are not going to get dragged into anything. They're going to be extremely careful. They'll push politically, etc., but they're going to be extremely careful about getting into some sort of an indirect fight with the United States, particularly mindful of the fact that Taiwan is a much, much higher priority for them. Would they necessarily be, any crocodile tears if they see the United States get involved, embroiled into another quagmire in the Middle East? Not necessarily. I think, they will draw some benefit from it. The difference, though, is Iran is an actor that is very, very important. Not to say that Iraq was unimportant, but this is a different world now, and Iran is much more important. I think they would be quite concerned if there was either a significant opening between the United States and Iran that actually led to Iran reorienting itself towards the US, which I think is not in the cards, even though many people tend to worry about that. Or that there would be some sort of regime change and there would be some sort of a regime installed there that would be very pro-American. They would be very concerned about those two types of scenarios. Russia, I think, is a little bit different. Russia is already in what they believe to be a proxy war with the United States. The train has already left the station on these things. They believe, probably quite correctly, that a lot of the major successes that both substantive and symbolic that the Ukrainians have had is thanks to US intelligence and direct involvement. They could potentially see a war with Iran, not as a net benefit, but within it, an opportunity also to weaken the United States, just as the US has done to Russia and Ukraine from their perspective. They could do the same. So you could see weapons and other types of support. But at the same time, I don't know what level the Russians are at right now, in the sense that they seem to be in need of ammunition and weapons, etc. themselves. So I don't know to what extent they truly, truly are in a position to be able to help with that. But I don't think they're going to do anything to push things in that direction. But if it happens, I think it will be a complex game in which there will be some elements there that they also think can be helpful to them by weakening the United States. This is part of the reason I think it would be an absolutely insane thing for the United States to allow Israel to drag itself into this war. And you saw the readout from Biden's conversation yesterday with Netanyahu. The readout mentioned nothing about putting any pressure on Israel. The leaked stories afterwards seem to suggest that there was something, but at this point, the administration has kind of lost credibility. Reports of how tough they have been behind the scenes against Israel and Netanyahu is simply unconvincing unless there's actually some impact on Netanyahu, and so far we have not seen that.
Yeah,
except
I just mentioned Robert Wood's speech was devoid of any criticism, even gentle, of Israel's flagrant violations.
Exactly.
It was the onus was entirely on Iran.
Yeah, and this is the approach of this administration. To me, Biden's foreign policy is not a continuation of Obama. Biden's foreign policy is the Hillary Clinton foreign policy we would have gotten if she had won the election.
Right. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. I know your time is limited today, Trita, and I really hope that we'll have.
Thank you so much for having me.
Take care.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye-bye.